Welcome to Dark Screen Chronicles, where the silence of night reveals secrets best left undisturbed. Tonight, we invite you to journey with us into the heart of isolation, into the eerie moments when being home alone turns into a descent into terror. In the shadows of familiar spaces, something sinister lurks, waiting for the perfect moment to make its presence known. Prepare yourself as we unravel 5 chilling tales, stories of unexpected visitors, unseen presences, and secrets that haunt the quiet corners of our most personal sanctuaries. Each narrative is a whisper from the darkness, a reminder that even in solitude, you are never truly alone. Now dim the lights, silence your doubts, and let the terror begin. I wasn't prepared for what happened that night. It's been years since it happened, but I still can't shake it. I keep telling myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I know it wasn't. It felt too real. It started like any other night. My parents were out of town for the weekend, and I was home alone. I love the peace and quiet, especially since the neighborhood is so calm. Nothing ever happens around here. I was just about to settle in for a quiet evening with a cup of tea when I noticed something strange, something that I still don't fully understand. I was sitting by the window, watching the sunset. There's this feeling you get sometimes when you're alone, like something's off, but you can't figure out what it is. I tried to ignore it, but it didn't go away. It got worse as the light started to fade and the darkness crept in. The quiet felt too heavy, too thick, like the world outside my house was holding its breath. My thoughts seemed louder somehow, and the noises from the outside seemed distant, almost muted. But I kept telling myself it was just a normal night, nothing to worry about. As soon as the night hit, the house felt different. I can't explain it, like the silence became too heavy, almost suffocating. But I brushed it off. I wasn't scared. I was just alone. I decided to head to my room, thinking I could relax and watch a movie, but then it happened. It was the faintest tapping at the window. At first, I thought it was just a branch from the tree outside, but when I looked, nothing. No wind, no branches moving, just the tapping, over and over again. I couldn't see anyone. I couldn't hear anything, but the tapping kept going, and it wasn't like something brushing against the glass. It was deliberate, like someone was knocking, gently, but insistently. I checked the window, checked the yard. Nothing. It was empty. So I closed the blinds, thinking it was my imagination. But even then, the feeling didn't go away. I felt watched, like someone was right outside, waiting. I went to bed. My heart was racing, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. I tried to calm down. I didn't want to be that person who gets scared by every little noise. But then, the tapping started again. This time, louder. I could hear it clearly against the glass. I rushed over to the window and peered out, but there was nothing. Just the same empty yard, the same dark street. My breath came in short bursts, but I told myself there was nothing there. I wasn't going to let myself get freaked out over nothing. But then I saw it. I didn't know what it was at first. It was like a shadow moving across the yard, just out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly to look, but there was nothing. No figure, no movement, just the shadows of the trees swaying in the breeze. I thought I was losing it. I decided to go check the rest of the house just to reassure myself that everything was fine. The locks were secure, the doors were locked. No sign of anyone. But then I stopped. And I don't know why I stopped, but I did. I felt that feeling again, the feeling that I was being watched. I walked back to my room, and that's when I saw it. Or rather, when I didn't see it. I went back to my window. The blinds were closed, but I could see the reflection of my room in the glass. And in the reflection, I saw it. A figure. Standing outside, not too far from the window, just standing there. Staring. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking at me. It wasn't moving. It wasn't doing anything but watching, just standing there in the dark. I froze. My heart stopped, and I couldn't breathe. It was like I was paralyzed. I turned around to look out the window directly, but when I looked, there was nothing there. No figure. No one. The yard was empty again, but in the reflection, the figure remained, still watching. I stepped away from the window, my legs weak beneath me. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, some kind of shadow, or my mind playing games with me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The figure in the reflection was too real. I felt my body shaking, my pulse quickening. The silence in the house felt suffocating now, like the air was thick with something I couldn't see but could feel pressing against me. It was like the walls were closing in. I walked across the room, trying to shake off the dread creeping up my spine. But then I heard it again. The tapping, soft at first, but gradually louder, almost insistent now. It wasn't at the window this time. It was coming from the door. I could hear it clearly, coming from the other side, soft but rhythmic, knocking, like someone was trying to get in. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I couldn't even look away from the door. The sound continued, each tap like a hammer driving into my skull. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I reached for my phone. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but I couldn't find the strength to dial. I just kept staring at the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for whatever was outside to come in. But it never opened. The door stayed shut. And then just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the house went completely still. No tapping, no noise, nothing. I waited, tense and afraid to move. But when I looked at the window again, that's when I saw it. The figure. It was right there, outside the window. But this time, I could see it clearly. It wasn't just standing anymore. It was walking toward me. Slow, deliberate steps, its head tilted at an odd angle, as if it was studying me. Its body was tall, unnaturally tall, and it didn't move like a person. It moved with a kind of twisted fluidity, like it was stretching its limbs beyond what they were meant to do. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. And the worst part? It wasn't even trying to hide anymore. The figure stepped closer, and I saw it more clearly than I ever wanted to. Its face, if you could even call it that, was just a blank, pale mask. No eyes, no features, just a smooth, empty surface where a face should have been. I tried to scream. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My mind was screaming for me to escape, but all I could do was stare at that empty face, frozen in terror. And that's when I heard it again, the tapping, but this time it was coming from behind me. Whipping around, I saw it. The figure was standing in my doorway, blocking the only way out. The door had opened on its own, the handle slowly turning by itself. I was trapped. Completely and utterly trapped. I don't know how I got out of that house. I don't remember running. I don't remember leaving. All I remember is standing outside, my heart pounding, my body numb with fear. I ran to the neighbor's house and stayed there the rest of the night. I couldn't bring myself to go back until my parents came home. I haven't been back in that room since, and I haven't been able to sleep properly either. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it again. The tapping, software insistent, like someone still waiting outside. And even now, when I'm in my own house, sometimes I hear it. That soft, rhythmic knocking. And I wonder, is it really over? Because sometimes the worst thing isn't the thing you see. It's the thing you can't see that's always out of view, but always watching. I've always enjoyed being home alone. My parents would often go out for the weekend, leaving me with the house to myself. I could relax, enjoy some quiet, do whatever I wanted. That night, though, things felt different. But I couldn't have known then how wrong I was. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, just trying to wind down. It was already late, around midnight, and the house was as still as I had ever known it. The kind of stillness where the only sounds you hear are your own breathing and the occasional creak of the house settling. I had the house to myself, just the way I liked it. Then the phone rang. It wasn't my cell phone, but the landline. The one in the kitchen, the one that almost never rang. The ring sliced through the silence like a sharp knife, and I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. My friends knew I was home alone, and no one else called this late. Still, I walked downstairs to the kitchen, wondering if it was just some wrong number, or maybe even a telemarketer. I picked up the receiver, half-heartedly, saying, "Hello." At first, there was only silence on the other end. I held the phone to my ear, waiting for a response. Nothing. I almost hung up when I heard the faintest whisper through the static. "I see you." It was a voice, soft and raspy, barely audible, but it made my blood run cold. I pulled the phone away, staring at the receiver in my hand. Was this a prank? I had no idea, but something felt wrong. Too wrong to be a joke. I shakily said, "Who is this?" But the voice didn't answer. Instead, there was just a long pause, followed by a series of clicks, like someone was adjusting the line, trying to get a better connection. "You're alone," the voice whispered, "and you know it." Now I was starting to feel genuinely afraid. Who was messing with me? How did they know I was alone? The voice wasn't familiar. There was nothing about it that made sense. The more I tried to dismiss it, the more unsettled I became. The house felt too big, too empty, too quiet. I hung up, hoping the feeling would pass. I convinced myself it was just a wrong number, maybe someone who had dialed the wrong digits. But I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. I tried to distract myself, maybe catch a late-night movie or do something to keep my mind occupied. But nothing worked. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind outside made me jump. I didn't know why, but I had the overwhelming sense that someone was there with me, and it wasn't just my imagination. That's when it happened again. The phone rang. This time, I didn't even hesitate. I picked it up immediately, almost afraid not to. A part of me needed to know who was on the other end. A part of me didn't want to be left in the dark. "I told you," the voice said, this time louder, clearer. "I'm watching you." My heart skipped a beat. My mind raced. What was happening? How did they know? How could they see me? I quickly glanced around the room, but there was nothing. No movement, no shadows, just the quiet hum of the night. But the feeling of eyes on me, the feeling that someone was lurking just beyond my view, was overwhelming. I dropped the phone for a moment, my hand trembling. I could hear the voice still whispering in the background, faintly, like a low hum that refused to fade. Then the line went dead. I didn't know what to do. My instincts told me to leave, to get out of the house, but I was paralyzed with fear. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the phone, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. Then, just as I thought it was over, I heard it. Knocking. Software. At first it was quiet, just a tap. But then it came again, louder, more deliberate. Each knock sent a jolt of fear through my chest. I didn't want to open the door. My heart raced. The house felt too still, too quiet. But the knocks kept coming, one after the other. I didn't move. I stayed frozen in my chair, listening as the knocks continued, echoing through the hallway. Who could it be at this hour? And why didn't they just knock like a normal person? Why did it feel so strange? I slowly got up and walked towards the door, my mind racing. It had to be someone, maybe a neighbor or a friend playing a cruel prank. I crept over to the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the doorknob. I couldn't decide whether to open it or not, but before I could make a decision, the phone rang again. I hesitated for a second, then picked up the receiver, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hello?" "I'm in the kitchen," the voice said, its tone cold, like it was daring me to challenge it. Now, panic set in. How did they know? How could they possibly know I was standing at the door? I wasn't in the kitchen. I hadn't been there in hours. I dropped the phone again and bolted for the kitchen. I had to check. But the moment I entered the room, I froze. The light was on. I was sure I had turned it off earlier. The room was empty, but there was something about it that felt wrong. The silence felt too heavy. The room felt too still. I quickly scanned the counters, the table, the floor. Nothing. But my gaze kept drifting back to the light. Why was it on? I hadn't touched it. Suddenly I heard a sound, a faint creak coming from the hallway. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The phone rang again, and I knew I had to pick it up. I had no choice. But my hand hovered over the receiver, trembling. I picked it up finally, almost in slow motion, my mind fighting against the fear gnawing at me. "You left the kitchen," the voice whispered. "Now I'm standing at the front door." My heart raced in my chest as I ran to the front of the house, looking through the peephole, my breath coming in shallow gasps. No one was there. The porch light cast a pale glow on the empty steps, the yard still as a grave. But as I turned away, I heard the door handle jiggle, slowly, quietly, as if someone was trying to get in. I rushed to lock the door, my mind spinning with confusion and dread. How could this be happening? Who was this person? Why hadn't I noticed anything before? It didn't make sense. Nothing about it made sense. The knocks came again, this time louder, more insistent. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no sign of anyone. No strange cars in the driveway, no footprints in the snow, no signs of forced entry. Just the empty house, the ringing phone, and the unmistakable feeling that I wasn't alone. They searched the house, but they didn't find anything. Not even a trace of the person who had been calling me. That night still haunts me. To this day, I don't know who it was on the other end of the phone. I don't know how they knew so much about me, how they could see me, or why they came. I'm still terrified of being alone in the house, and every time my phone rings, I hesitate, wondering if that voice will be there again. Sometimes I think about that night, about the whispers, the knocking, the feeling of being watched. I try not to, but I can't help it. And when I close my eyes, sometimes I still hear it. I'm watching you. I had always liked being alone in the house. It was a rare treat. My parents out for the evening, leaving me to enjoy the solitude. The kind of peace you only get when you're the only one in the house. But that night, something felt off. A strange tension hung in the air, like something wasn't quite right. The house was old, with creaky floors and windows that rattled in the wind. It was an oddly comforting sound normally, but tonight, the wind howled through the trees and rattled the window panes a little too loudly. The whole house seemed to sigh, as if it were trying to tell me something. I sat on the couch, watching a random movie, but my focus kept drifting. The wind outside howled louder, and I could hear the rain begin to tap against the glass. Everything seemed fine, except for the uneasiness creeping up my spine. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just imagining things, but the feeling lingered. As I leaned back, trying to relax, a strange sound broke the quiet. The doorbell. A soft chime that echoed through the empty house. At first I thought it was the wind playing tricks on me, or maybe my mind wandering. But then I heard it again, the doorbell, this time more insistent. I froze. Who could it be? It was late, far too late for someone to be at the door. My parents were out, and I hadn't heard a car pull up. I stood up slowly, trying to listen carefully. Was I imagining it? No, it was definitely the doorbell. I glanced out the window beside the front door, trying to see who was there, but the rain blurred the view. The front porch light barely illuminated the space, casting long shadows across the doorstep. Whoever it was, they were standing just out of view. Against my better judgment, I approached the door. I hesitated, my heart racing. Should I open it? I didn't know who it could be. But the doorbell rang again, louder this time, more urgent. My pulse quickened as I stood there, my hand resting on the cold metal knob. Was it a neighbor? A lost delivery driver? My mind raced through possible scenarios. I reluctantly peered through the peephole. I couldn't see much, just a dark shape standing in the shadows. Whoever it was, they were tall. Too tall. And they didn't move. Just standing there, staring. My hand shook as I pulled back from the peephole. Who was that? I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe it was someone who had the wrong house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Another ring of the doorbell, this time followed by a soft, low knock. One single tap, as if to remind me that someone was waiting, that someone was out there. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced through every possible scenario, each one worse than the last. I stepped back from the door and ran to the living room, trying to think. Should I call my parents? The police? Who was out there at this time of night? Another knock, and then the voice. It came muffled through the door, but clear enough for me to hear. "Hello, is someone home?" the voice called out. It was calm, almost too calm, but there was something unsettling about it, a coldness to the tone. I couldn't place it, but it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't know what to do. Should I respond? Should I open the door? Something in my gut told me not to. But what if it was a real emergency? What if someone needed help? I stepped back toward the door, considering my options. Then the voice again, this time louder. "I just need to talk to you. I won't hurt you." My pulse hammered in my chest. I didn't know who this was or what they wanted. The words didn't make sense, and everything about this situation felt wrong. I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone. My fingers were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I dialed my parents, my voice low and panicked. The phone rang and rang, no answer. My mind raced, and then I remembered something. The window. The window right next to the front door. My breath caught in my throat as I turned toward it. Through the misty window, I saw it, the shadow of a figure moving outside. But it wasn't moving in a normal way. It was too quick, too jerky. It was almost like they were gliding, moving with an unnatural speed, coming closer to the window. I couldn't see the face, but I could feel the coldness in their presence. My heart hammered in my chest as I backed away from the window. I had to get out of the house. I had to run, but where? There was no escape. Then suddenly the front door creaked open a few inches, just enough to make a chilling sound. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't touched the knob. Someone, or something, had gotten inside. I didn't know how, but the door was open. I rushed to the back door, my hands shaking. As I glanced toward the hallway, I saw it. A figure standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at me, its features obscured by the darkness. I ran. I ran like I had never run before, through the back door and into the yard. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached the neighbor's house, gasping for air. My heart pounded in my chest as I knocked frantically on their door. I wanted to scream, but the only sound that escaped was a breathless sob. The minutes felt like hours. The neighbor opened the door, her eyes wide with confusion. I didn't even explain. I just bolted past her into the warmth of their house. I collapsed onto the couch, trying to catch my breath, but the terror didn't leave. It clung to me like a shadow. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice concerned but calm. I couldn't form words. I had no idea how to explain the impossible things I'd seen. The feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was there, something wrong. The fear gnawed at me, a constant, choking pressure in my throat. Eventually, I managed to tell her about the doorbell, the knocking, the voice. I could see the disbelief in her eyes. I was just a kid, after all. Who would believe that? But when I mentioned the figure in the window, standing just beyond the reach of the porch light, her expression changed. She took a step back, her face draining of color. I couldn't understand why she looked so scared. I tried to calm myself, to rationalize what had happened. "Maybe it was a prank," I said, trying to convince both of us. Maybe it was just someone messing around. But the words didn't comfort me. I could still see the shadow in my mind, still hear the knock at the door. The neighbor said she was going to call the police. I nodded, not sure what good it would do, but it was the only thing left to do. As she went to get the phone, I stood by the window, looking out into the rain-soaked night. My eyes darted around, expecting something, someone, to be watching me. But the street was empty, save for the flickering streetlight and the damp pavement. The silence that followed was deafening. The doorbell had stopped ringing. The knocks had ceased, but the coldness had settled in my bones. It was like the world was holding its breath. I didn't dare move from the window, my eyes scanning the dark street. And then it happened. The front porch light flickered, just once. But it was enough. Enough to make my blood run cold. I turned away from the window, my breath coming in shallow gasps. What if they were still there? What if they never left? The neighbor returned with the phone in her hand, but I could barely hear her over the ringing in my ears. I couldn't take my eyes off the window. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, shifting and flickering. My mind raced with horrible possibilities. What had I really seen that night? Was I just imagining things? Or was there something more sinister happening just outside? Suddenly, a sharp knock came from the door again. It was slow, deliberate, 3 distinct raps. My body went numb. The neighbor looked at me, her face pale. She had heard it too. The knock was unmistakable. But this time, I didn't have the courage to go near the door. I slowly backed away from the window and looked around the room, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. It was as if the house was alive with something that didn't belong, something foreign. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I couldn't stay in this house any longer. I couldn't. But every part of me froze, unable to move. The knock came again, 3 taps, followed by a breathless silence, the kind of silence that made my skin crawl. The neighbor was on the phone now, talking to the police. Her voice was strained as she tried to explain the situation, but she kept looking at me with wide eyes. I could tell she didn't know what to make of it. How could she? It was too strange, too unbelievable. But then, the doorbell rang once more, a loud, jarring chime, followed by another knock. This time, though, it wasn't just from the front door. It sounded like it came from everywhere, the front, the back, the sides. It was as if the entire house itself was being surrounded. "You're not alone," the voice echoed in my mind. I couldn't shake it. The fear had escalated into something primal, something I couldn't control. I wanted to scream, to shout for help. But my voice was frozen. The house had never felt so cold. The police arrived within minutes, but by the time they reached the house, everything had gone still. No one was there, no sign of anyone at all. The doors were locked, the windows secure. The house was as empty as it had been hours ago. But when they checked the front porch, they found something strange. A small, crumpled piece of paper. No words, just a symbol. Something unfamiliar, something that didn't make sense. A drawing. It was as if the person had been waiting for me to see it. Waiting for me to open the door. The police didn't know what to make of it. They took the paper with them, but no one ever came back to explain it. And after that night, I couldn't help but wonder if that figure had ever really left. Was it still watching, still waiting for the right moment? To this day, I don't know who was at that door or why they came. And every time I hear a doorbell ring at night, my heart stops for a moment, wondering if it's the same figure still out there, and if one day they'll finally get inside. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. My roommate had gone out of town for a few days to visit her family, and I was left with the house all to myself. I had always enjoyed these moments of solitude, the rare chance to relax without anyone around. The house was old, creaky floorboards, long hallways, and strange, almost oppressive quiet. But it was home. The first night felt completely normal. I spent the evening doing what I usually did, watching TV, scrolling on my phone, and just enjoying the stillness. But as I got ready for bed, I started to hear something strange. A faint, almost imperceptible creak from above. It was so quiet that I thought I might be imagining it. It came again, a slow, deliberate creak, followed by a faint rustling sound, like something moving around in the attic. I brushed it off. The house was old, and old houses creak. It could have been the wind, or maybe something in the attic shifting. I didn't give it much thought. The next night, however, it happened again. The same creaks, the same rustling. This time, it was harder to ignore. I stood still, straining my ears, wondering if I was hearing things. The noises continued, louder now, almost rhythmic. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, dragging across the floor above me. By the third night, I couldn't deny it anymore. There was something or someone up there. I didn't know who or what it could be, but the noises were unmistakable. And with every passing hour, the sense of being watched became more intense. Every time I walked through the house, I would glance over my shoulder, but there was never anyone there. Yet the feeling lingered. It wasn't just the noises, it was something else, something deeper. It felt like eyes were on me, following me around the house. Still, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was a raccoon or a squirrel up in the attic making the sounds. But when I started finding things moved around, I couldn't chalk it up to coincidence anymore. One night, I set my keys on the kitchen counter, only to find them gone when I returned. At first I thought I'd just misplaced them, but then it happened again. My phone charger, which I had left plugged into the wall, was missing. A bottle of water that I had set on the coffee table was now on the floor, its cap slightly unscrewed. I began to feel a creeping dread. Was I losing my mind? Was I forgetting things? Or was something or someone moving around my house while I wasn't looking? I locked my bedroom door at night just to feel safer, but the strange feeling never went away. If anything, it intensified. I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was standing just behind me, watching me from the shadows. The nights passed in a haze of unease. Every time I heard a creak, I would freeze. Every time I felt a draft, I would check the windows to see if they were open. Every time something was moved, I tried to rationalize it, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Something was wrong in this house. It wasn't until the fourth night that I couldn't take it anymore. The noise coming from the attic had escalated. It wasn't just creaks and rustling anymore. I could hear things being dragged across the floor, like someone was moving furniture. A loud thud, followed by more scraping, and then the footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, like someone was walking through the attic with purpose. I knew I had to check. I couldn't ignore it any longer. My heart was pounding in my chest as I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the attic door. The stairs were steep and narrow, the old wood groaning under my weight. As I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the door handle. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but whatever it was, I knew it wouldn't be good. I slowly turned the handle and pushed the door open. A stale, musty smell hit me immediately, and I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The attic was dark, the only light coming from the faint beam of my flashlight. I called out, my voice trembling. "Hello? Is someone up here?" There was no answer. The silence that followed was suffocating, but it didn't feel empty. It felt wrong. I stepped inside, shining the flashlight around, my breath shallow and quick. Boxes were stacked haphazardly in the corners, old furniture covered in sheets, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air. But as I moved further in, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A small makeshift bed was tucked behind a stack of old boxes, blankets and pillows arranged as though someone had been sleeping there. My heart sank. Someone had been living in the attic. I didn't know who or why, but the evidence was undeniable. I felt a wave of nausea and panic rise in my throat. Had my roommate been hiding someone up there? Or had someone been sneaking into the house while I was gone? I stepped back, my mind racing, when I heard a rustle behind me. I spun around, the flashlight trembling in my hand. For a brief second, I thought I saw a shadow move in the corner of my eye. But when I looked again, the attic was empty. I didn't wait to investigate further. I ran out of the attic, slamming the door behind me. I locked myself in my bedroom, my pulse racing. Was someone still in the house? My mind was reeling. I grabbed my phone and tried to call my roommate, but there was no answer. I texted her, asking if she had come home early, but she replied minutes later, telling me she was still out of town. The house was empty, except for me, and the person hiding in the attic. I couldn't stay there another minute. I grabbed my phone again and dialed 911. My voice shook as I explained the situation, barely able to keep it together. The operator told me to stay in my room and lock the door. I did, but the fear gnawed at me. I could hear footsteps above me again, the sound of someone moving through the attic. But now, it was different. It wasn't just a random creak. It was deliberate, calculated. Someone was moving around, and they knew I was down here. Minutes later, I heard sirens outside. The police had arrived. I could hear them knocking on the door, shouting for me to let them in. My hands were shaking as I opened the door, and the officers quickly entered the house, weapons drawn. They didn't waste any time. They immediately made their way to the attic. I stood frozen in the hallway, waiting for what felt like an eternity. The sound of footsteps overhead was gone. Everything was eerily quiet. And then I heard the officers' voices. They were talking, but their words didn't register. I couldn't understand them over the roar of blood in my ears. It wasn't until they came back downstairs that I fully understood what had happened. One of the officers held up a bag that hadn't been there before. Inside were clothes, food wrappers, and other personal belongings. The figure from the attic had been living there for months, hidden from everyone. The officers had found the intruder, a stranger who had been sneaking into the house over time, making themselves at home in the attic without my knowledge. I was told the person had been using the attic as a hiding place, slipping in and out of the house undetected, watching me every day, learning my routines. They had been living in the shadows, never making their presence known. And now, they were being arrested. The relief of knowing the nightmare was finally over was overshadowed by the horror of realizing just how close I had been to something far worse. I never truly felt safe again. I moved out of that house as soon as I could, but even now I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching me. The memories of those footsteps, those strange movements, and the figure in the attic haunt me. A constant reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones you never see. It was supposed to be a normal evening for Mia. She'd been craving solitude after a stressful week, a night to unwind. The apartment was her safe space, a small but cozy retreat from the world. The city buzzed just outside her window, but within, she felt a familiar calm until she stepped inside. As Mia entered, she sighed with relief, the quiet of her apartment offering a temporary escape. She dropped her keys on the table and flicked on the light. The soft glow of the lamp should have been comforting, but it wasn't. The shadows that stretched across the room seemed thicker than usual. She moved through the hallway, and for a moment the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. There was something off. The air felt colder than it should have been, as though someone had opened a window. But there was no draft. Mia paused, looking over her shoulder. The hallway behind her was empty. Her eyes locked on the hallway mirror for just a second longer than normal. The faintest flicker of movement. She turned quickly, but there was nothing. just the familiar reflection of herself. She exhaled shakily, brushing it off. "It's just the lighting," she told herself. "You're imagining things." But the discomfort lingered. By nightfall, the silence in the apartment grew heavy, suffocating. The ticking of the clock on the wall felt too loud, like a constant reminder that she was alone. Each creak of the floorboards under her feet seemed unnaturally loud, like someone was walking behind her. Then came the first noise, a thud from the kitchen. At first, Mia ignored it, assuming it was a neighbor or just the house settling. But then another sound, faint, barely audible, like the scraping of something along the floor. A shiver ran down her spine. Mia stood frozen. She was sure she hadn't left anything out of place, yet the sound continued, growing more distinct. A movement coming from the kitchen. She stepped toward it cautiously, her breath shallow. When she reached the doorway, she stopped. The family photograph she had left on the counter earlier that day, something she always placed with meticulous care, was now crooked, hanging off the edge of the table. A slight but noticeable detail. Mia's stomach turned, an unease spreading through her. Someone had touched it, but she was alone. Mia tried to shake it off, telling herself it was just her imagination, the tiredness setting in. She returned to the couch and attempted to lose herself in a movie. But as her eyes glanced toward the window behind her, something caught her eye, something unnatural. In the reflection of the window, in the darkened glass, a shadow moved. At first, it was barely visible, a blur. But as her eyes focused, it became clearer. A tall, thin figure standing in the hallway. Its limbs were unnaturally long, twisted. It didn't belong to her, not even in the faintest sense. She turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes scanned the hallway, but there was nothing. The light in the hallway flickered briefly, casting a distorted shadow that seemed to twist in on itself, as if the hallway was moving. The hairs on her neck stood on end. Mia backed away from the window, her heart hammering in her chest. She forced herself to move toward the hallway, the silence now suffocating her, pressing against her chest like an invisible weight. But when she reached the doorway, there was nothing there, nothing at all. The unease grew by the minute. The apartment, once her refuge, now felt like a cage, a suffocating, oppressive place where every corner, every darkened space, felt filled with a threat just out of reach. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting for her to make a move. She checked every room again, each closet, under every piece of furniture. Her flashlight sliced through the dark corners, but it revealed nothing. Still, the feeling gnawed at her, the constant sense that she wasn't alone. As she sat back down, trying to force herself to relax, the whispering began, low, indistinct voices that seemed to swirl around her. Too soft to make out any words, but unmistakable. They grew louder, closer, as though they were coming from inside the walls themselves. Mia's heart raced. The air felt thick now, almost suffocating. She could hear her pulse in her ears, the rhythmic thumping of her own fear. She looked around, her eyes darting to every corner. But there was nothing. The whispers didn't stop. It was deep into the night when the knock came. 3 loud, deliberate knocks at the door. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't heard anyone approach. She hadn't seen anyone outside. But the knocks came again. Urgent, demanding. Frozen, she stood at the door, her hand hovering over the handle. She could feel something on the other side, something that wasn't human. Her mind screamed at her to turn away, to lock the door, but her feet refused to move. With a trembling hand, Mia opened the door, just a crack. The hallway outside was empty, just a stretch of darkness that seemed to go on forever. But there, on the floor at her feet, was something that made her blood run cold. A note, written in a hand she didn't recognize. The message was simple. "You're not alone. We've always been here." Mia's breath hitched, her heart racing. She slammed the door shut, locking it behind her. But the whispers didn't stop. They had never stopped. They were in the walls. They were inside the apartment, inside her mind. And as the clock ticked past midnight, Mia realized with horror, whatever had been watching her, whatever had been waiting in the shadows, was no longer just outside. The night stretched on, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen things stirring in the dark. Mia sat huddled in the corner of her living room, clutching a blanket around her shoulders as though it could protect her. But there was no comfort here, no safety. She couldn't shake the feeling that the walls themselves were closing in on her. Her eyes darted around the room, flicking from corner to corner, her mind racing with fear. The shadows had grown thicker. The air felt denser. The clock on the wall continued to tick, but now it felt like the seconds were dragging on, mocking her with their slow, relentless passage. Then she heard it again, a soft shuffle, a dragging sound, like someone, or something, was slowly moving across the floor. But it wasn't coming from the kitchen or the hallway this time. It was coming from within the walls. The sound seemed to slither through the cracks, whispering like 1,000 voices in a language Mia couldn't understand. Mia's chest tightened, her breath shallow, as she tried to convince herself it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. There was something here, something that didn't belong, and it was getting closer. As the hours passed, Mia's exhaustion began to overtake her. Her body was shutting down, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. She couldn't close her eyes, not with the whispers growing louder, more distinct, the sensation of being watched intensifying by the second. Finally, she could no longer stay still. The fear gnawed at her, pulling her toward the hallway. Each step felt like a battle. She had to know, had to understand what was happening in her own home. She moved toward the kitchen, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet, the unsettling sound of her own footsteps echoing in the silence. As she approached the kitchen, something caught her eye, a shadow just beyond the doorframe. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a figure standing there, tall, thin, its face obscured by the darkness. But when she blinked, it was gone. She hesitated, heart pounding in her chest, before gathering the courage to step inside. The kitchen was empty. No one was there. But then she noticed it, on the counter just beside the sink, was something she hadn't put there, a small silver key. It glistened in the dim light, completely out of place. Mia stared at the key, her breath catching in her throat. It was unmistakable, familiar, like she had seen it before, but she couldn't place where. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, the cold metal sending a shock of panic through her. She turned the key over in her hand. Nothing. No markings, no inscription, nothing to give her a clue as to its purpose. But then a thought flickered in her mind, a thought that chilled her to the bone. The attic that had always been locked, the one she had never dared to explore. With a sickening realization, Mia knew the key was meant for that door. But why now? And who, what, had been leaving the strange clues in her apartment? A flood of memories hit her. Memories of the previous tenants, the ones who had mysteriously disappeared. Had they left in haste, or had something driven them away? Had whatever had haunted them now turned its attention on her? With shaky hands, Mia grabbed the key, her mind clouded with dread as she moved toward the attic door. Every step felt like a lifetime, each breath thick with fear, as the whispers grew louder, more insistent.